And going back to kind of how the invisibility factor of being a trans traveler, not having the representation, even though we very much so want to travel, we are very much so existing. There are 2.8 million trans people in the US, and a lot of us want to travel. A lot of us, I think, are like me, where we're transitioning later in life. We have decades and decades of great travel experiences, and now our experiences and our travel needs have changed, and those resources are not available to us. And I think talking to my trans friends and realizing kind of the horror stories that they've experienced in bathrooms and the fears that they're experiencing, there's a lot of challenging things, and it's hard to find information. And I think at first I'm like, is this too niche? But it's not niche. It's not too niche.
And that is today's guest, Chase Vondran, talking about exploring small queer towns and gayberhoods around the U.S. I know you wouldn't think you'd find thriving queer communities in many rural parts of the country, but Chase has, and we are lucky enough that they shared all about them with us today. Chase is a full-time travel creator and writer who helps transgender and gender diverse travelers explore safely while advocating for greater inclusion in the travel industry. They spent 8 years traveling the world as a nomad and are now based in Chicago, but of course continue to travel and share content focusing on queer and trans travel. As a fellow queer traveler myself, this topic is so meaningful to me for so many ways, but especially because more visibility of queer travel is so vital. I was so surprised by some of the hidden gems Chase shared today because honestly, these aren't places that you'd expect to find a thriving queer community. So definitely keep listening if you want to discover some new spots to go visit that you've probably never heard of. We also talk about these little vibrant communities and how they came to be. And we speak to Chase's experience traveling as a trans person. So if you're a fellow queer traveler like me, or simply an ally curious to better understand the experience of trans travelers, you'll get all of that and so much more today. So buckle up. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friends.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams.
Hi, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, the show to help you travel on your terms. And if you haven't heard my voice before, I'm Dianni Hall, a former full-time traveler who spent 7 years backpacking around the world and the host of the While She's Away podcast, where I talk about solo female travel and queer travel. I'm so excited to be a part of the Zero to Travel Host Collective, which is a rotating cast of trusted guest hosts designed to give you an even wider variety of perspectives, new destinations to explore, and plenty of practical advice to help you travel the world on your terms. It is truly such an honor to be a part of the show that helped me at the beginning of my travel journey so many years ago. This feels like such a full circle moment, honestly. And if you want to find out more about me, you can check out the While She's Away podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter to keep in touch and get updates on new episodes, stay on top of travel trends, and get money-saving travel advice and loads more at zerototravel.com/newsletter. Okay? Ready? Let's dive into the interview. I gave a little teaser before, but to say a little bit more, today's guest is Chase Vondran. And over a decade ago, Chase quit his job, sold everything, and spent 8 years traveling the world as a nomad. Probably more to escape than seek adventure, like some of us don't like to admit, myself included, but we're not going to get hung up on that right now. Along the way, they traveled to 20 plus countries, started a travel blog, and gained unique insight into the different ways the world treats you, first as a woman and now as a queer trans person. Today, Chase is a full-time travel creator and writer who helps transgender and gender diverse travelers explore safely while advocating for greater inclusion in the travel industry. He is happily based in Chicago with his husband and 3 fur children. I'm so excited to be bringing you this interview today, and please be sure to stick around to the end. After the interview, I'll be sharing my biggest takeaways from this conversation and how it all ties into my personal experience as a queer traveler as well. So please be sure to stay tuned to the very end for that as well. But now, without further ado, I bring you my interview with Chase. Chase, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. We were chatting a little bit about before we hit record, this being the first interview that you've done in a while now as Chase. And I'm excited to talk about your experience as a queer traveler, talk about queer travel in general, add some more voices to the space, like talk on the things that need to be talked about. So I'm really happy to have you.
Thank you.
I wanted to start by getting into a little bit of your bio. I did a little bit of stalking of you, and I know you spent 8 years traveling as a nomad to 20 plus countries, you said, which you started around 22, which I thought was so funny because I also mentioned before we hit record, our stories feel so aligned in so many ways. I also started at 23, also spent 6-7 years. So very, very aligned. I also felt like I figured out a bit of my queerness while traveling and on the road as well. So would love to dive into your experience. Were you out and open during that time, during those 8 years? And if not, what did that transition into coming out look like while you were traveling?
Yeah, so I technically came out, like it was during a college course. I think I was like a sophomore, junior in college. It was a human sexualities class, and we were told about the Kinsey scale. And we had to write a paper about where we fell on the Kinsey scale. And that kind of like jolted me into realizing that like, oh, I'm not straight. Like, and kind of talking about queer experiences that I didn't realize were queer, which I feel like is a lot of our stories, is that it's kind of like normalized growing up as a woman, and kissing other girls is like so normalized and kind of like a straight thing to do, which is weird. When you actually like look at things, you're like, this is like, the culture is so weird. Anyways. So that was the first time, and I started dating queer folks. I went on a few queer dates, and it felt like a lot. It kind of felt scary, and I kind of like put it on the back burner. Like I definitely went to pride parades since high school. I was very much like having queer friends, but I didn't date. I wasn't like in a queer It's weird now being trans. I'm like, how do I say this? But I started dating exclusively men until I came out as lesbian years and years later. But it felt like travel allowed me to escape, definitely, and experiment. It's like you're not perceived by like your friends at home or people that know you. So it's like this really beautiful time where you can just kind of be whoever you want a bit. So, I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable going to like queer events or, but I could kind of just like jump into things more so while traveling. Yeah. So I identified as bisexual, for most of my travels.
Yeah. But when you were I remember I was reading one of your blogs, and you said when you were in Korea, specifically in South Korea, teaching English, that you had been kind of like journaling and come to an additional realization at that moment, and kind of blew up your life from there.
Yeah, the pressure of the pandemic was so real. I was in a studio apartment with my ex, who I had been with for around 4 years, and who was a cis man. And I kept feeling like just something wasn't right. And I kept writing in my journal, like, I think I'm gay. I think I'm gay. Like, and then finally things blew up and we broke up. And then I went home, I left Korea. And that's kind of when I was like, started, reading the Lesbian Master Doc. I like full plunged into the sapphic community, which was like what I really needed. It helped me like decenter heterosexuality, decenter kind of like gender expression, decenter men, the male gaze, and all of that stuff, which definitely led me to realizing that I was trans too. It's like to be fully embraced by the lesbian community is like something that's definitely one of my favorite chapters for sure. And I'm so grateful to the lesbian community.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love to hear that. You'd also mentioned how a part of embracing the lesbian community and feeling so welcomed, you defined this kind of move like you left South Korea. You said you went home. I think eventually went to Puerto Vallarta, and you said specifically, like, I made queer friends and went to my first queer women event, and it changed my life. And I'm so curious, like, what about that experience, if you can explain that experience to us, what that was like, and then what about it was so life-changing for you?
Yeah, so I saw on Instagram that one of my mutuals was moving to Puerto Vallarta, and I was in my mother's second bedroom in the suburbs of Chicago, like at 30 years old, like what the hell am I going to do with my life? I'm very much like creating content, but making pennies from it and working online. And so I was like, I called her and I was like, or I reached out to her and I said, do you mind if I kind of join you on this trip? I'd never met her in real life, but I feel like that's kind of like the culture of like the travel world, is that you're like, oh yeah, you backpack, I backpack, like, where are you going? Let's like,
absolutely.
And so that person is still my dear friend to this day. And so I moved to Puerto Vallarta with them and we got an apartment. So Puerto Vallarta is like, for those who are listening that don't know, it's like the gayest place in Mexico. It's like just queer Disneyland. It's like almost every bar is queer, I feel, in downtown. So yeah, we went to a lesbian pool party, and that was the first time in my life which sounds crazy, that it was the first time in my life it was like all queer women or sapphic people in a room. And the event was so intentional and so well done. And even the bartenders, the security, like there were no cis men in the room, and it just felt so safe. And again, going back to like decentering men and like getting rid of like the male gaze was just like so empowering. And I just felt like so seen and excited. And there's just something electrifying about being in a room just like of all queer people. Like it's just, I don't even know how to explain it.
I wish I could translate the feeling to people who aren't queer to understand, but I do fully understand what you're talking about, and that feeling. It's really magical. But I've also really quickly want to touch on, I've never been to Puerto Vallarta, and I'm unaware of this gay mecca. Can you please share a little bit more about there, or like, what was more of your experience, or if there's places that you really enjoyed there? Like, would love to hear more.
It feels like a lifetime ago, but it's one of those places that's like historically queer. So it was kind of like secret at first. Within, it's like, it's word of mouth. One gay man is like, hey, this is like the place to be. And then all of a sudden there's one gay hotel, and there's 20 gay hotels. And then it's kind of like we take over, and it's like, a place that everyone can go to feel safe. And even, back in the day, closeted folks could be out, and I feel like places like that have kept like our community alive.
I love that. And I love what you said about the mix of culture with the queer experience there, and that there's history to that there. And I think a lot of times people associate like Latin American countries with not being as queer and open and accepting, which, I mean, being Hispanic, I can understand like that being the case in certain places, but also testing that idea or belief with places like that are so openly queer and feel safe is really beautiful.
Yeah, I think Mexico is definitely paving the way for Latin America to be more inclusive and safe and queer friendly.
Yeah. Well, you had, and I know this was before your transition, but you traveled during those 8 years in Latin America as well. How did you find being queer, like your experience there? I know it's kind of a bit of a hard question. I can understand too, because it's like, it depends on also how you present at the time. I think a lot of times if you're straight passing, you don't always get the questions. And so that can be harder, or if you're not traveling with a partner, and so those things kind of change the experience. But from what you can answer, like, how did you find that?
I obviously like loved Latin America. That's where I spent the most time. I just, again, felt so gravitated and went to the region. And one of my favorite countries was Guatemala, and I spent about 5 months, and then I went back, I spent another few weeks there, and then my spouse and I actually eloped to Guatemala, and we did like an elopement honeymoon fusion. So we spent 3 weeks in Guatemala, and it was a bit shocking how I think we went 7 days without seeing another queer couple. And I was like, it was kind of like shattering a bit, when you first go to a place and you just like fall in love and you feel so at home. But it's not that I don't love Guatemala, but it was a completely different experience. It's a bit isolating, not seeing any queer people. You don't really know if it's safe or not. And then just knowing that Guatemala, gay marriage is not, or marriage equality, they don't have marriage equality, and legally they aren't very protected, and there's some pushback. And so just reading about that beforehand, and then at the time being like a very visibly queer. At the time I was femme and my spouse's mask, so very like visible lesbian couple at the time. So yeah, we still loved it. It's like gorgeous, like full of volcanoes and like the lakes, and it's like still very like warm and colorful, but made me take a step back, and you kind of like, I saw how much I had grown and changed as a person, what I want out of travel, my travel experiences, kind of just having to be more careful. We did end up finding a sapphic bar in Antigua when we were there. So it's like when we finally found that, we're like, oh, and like ended up talking to like the owner and just like getting more of an idea what it was like to live there. And yeah, so it was a completely different experience. But I think everywhere is queer. Queerness is everywhere. So sometimes now we just have to kind of search for it more, and it's still there everywhere. Even I went to Egypt, and there's queer people there. There's queer people everywhere.
I think it's encountering it. I think you don't always realize how deprived you are of other queer people while traveling until you meet other queer people, and you're like, oh my God, I've been missing this energy, that same energy we were just talking about of when you're surrounded by it. I think because we've functioned in a like heteronormative world for so long, you can go without it. Obviously, we've all done it. And then you're kind of like, oh, whatever, fine. Like something's missing. But then you encounter it and you're like, oh my God, this is what I was looking for. And it's almost like finding a treasure, or like you're, on a scavenger hunt or something. So I can visualize that experience of you finding that sapphic bar, in Antigua, and being like, oh my God, this is exactly what we were looking for. And then also you'd mentioned what you want out of travel changing, or what you looked for being different after, I don't know if specifically after that experience in Guatemala or just in general. Can you speak a little bit more to that, of like what it is that you look for out of travel now that maybe you weren't as focused on before?
So after I came back, it's hard to say. It's hard. The timeline is hard because I've come out like 5 times. It's not a nice eat, pray, love, like eat, pray, gay moment. But so when I came home from South Korea and it hadn't come out that time is when I kind of, my love and passion for travel also intersected with my queerness to an extent that had never been before. And I started feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm 30 and I'm just realizing that places like Provincetown exist. And there's all of these like gayberhoods. And that's what kind of drew me to Puerto Vallarta, because it's kind of like this gay village, or like, you know, there's a gayberhood. There's, again, these historic gay places like Provincetown. There's gay hotels, gay resorts, gay campgrounds. It's like my 2 special interests, like combining, and like, you know, it's just like really, really, I was so nerding out about queer history, and just realizing that so much queerness exists that you don't even realize. Like, you know, the Spice Girls are queer, like everything growing up, like folks were just not out, and there was just like us. And some people go to Provincetown and have no idea that it's queer. Like, you just, if you're not in it, sometimes you don't see it, you know. I started kind of, again, just nerding out about gayberhoods, gay villages, and queer friendly places. And then nowadays, I definitely still want to visit places that are just like super gay and have a lot of queer history. I've started kind of, I feel like it's not so much like queer, it's like inclusive, culture forward, community centered, which is, I think, all of like, that is all queer, diverse places, progressive places, places where I feel inspired, and I feel like people are doing cool things and open and welcoming, and yeah, places not only you feel safe, but also seen and celebrated. And there, it might not be the queerest place, but again, it feels very queer in different ways.
No, I love that. There's so many ways that I want to take this, but you touched on, you know, finding the gayberhoods and things like that. And I think as someone who hasn't, specifically within the US, traveled the US that much, there's, especially now, this assumption of like smaller towns, smaller spaces aren't safe. They're more red, therefore more conservative, less queer friendly. And one thing I've noticed about a lot of your content is that you really lean into these smaller places, like these smaller towns, that you find like so many queer spaces within these small towns. And I think a lot of times, like we, like I said, tend to avoid those spaces as queer people. What has been the draw to like those specific places for you? You know, talk about big cities, going to Barcelona, and like Barcelona's super gay, X, Y, and Z, Puerto Vallarta. And you don't think about these like small American cities or small American towns. Like, how did that end up becoming the content you were creating or the places that you were discovering?
Yeah. So I was traveling actually in Spain. I promise I'm going to bring it back to the US. I was traveling in Spain, and I think my first ever gayberhood guide or video was about Chueca.
Yep, familiar.
In Madrid.
Yeah, Madrid.
Right? And that did really well, and people were so excited. And I was like, okay, I am excited to talk about these things. And then folks also don't know these places exist. And so it's been super organic. I'm so grateful. I think then I had, 1,000 followers, but back then, folks were like, oh, you have to check this out. And I think so much of queer travel historically, again, has been word of mouth. And so I have been just following the breadcrumbs of my followers, and someone recommended Saugatuck, Michigan, which is one of the small queer towns. I think that was I want to say that's the first small queer town that I went to. It's just about 2.5 hours north of Chicago. It's like the Provincetown of the Midwest. And I went, and was mind blown.
Say more.
I was like, okay, first of all, yeah, there's this connotation of like, okay, I'm a Midwest kid. I'm like, queerness is not here. I got to get out. You know, I got to go to Puerto Vallarta.
Yes.
But once I went to Saugatuck, it was over because the rainbow crosswalks, almost, I would say majority of the businesses downtown, it's the cutest small town. It's walkable. Majority of the businesses are queer owned. There's like so many farms. You can go apple picking. Like it's like there's a gay campground. There is a gay resort. And it really opened my mind of like, if this is in Michigan, like where, like what else is out there? Like I love visiting small towns. I feel like it's easy for a weekend getaway. I love a road trip travel. You can walk around town and like that can be your whole trip and you can have so much fun. I think city travel, while it's like an amazing experience and there's so much queerness in cities, of course, it can be like overwhelming. So for me, if I can just get in my car and drive 2.5 hours north and like not have to plan too much and then just kind of like explore, I think it's very accessible. So, well, Saugatuck was one of my videos that originally I think was one of my biggest videos that blew up. And shortly after that, I quit my job to do content creation full time. And there was like this openness from the industry within travel organizations wanting to work with diverse creators. And it all kind of aligned after that. So I was just so grateful to be able to talk about what I love and what I'm like so interested in and then have it be my job as well. Oh yeah, I was going to say shortly after that, I went to Eureka Springs, which is again like a province town in a Saugatuck in the middle of Arkansas.
See, that's my thing. How does that even like end up becoming a small queer town?
These places exist in every single state, everywhere across the US. Like, I mean, in Florida is the epicenter of like queer small towns and like gay places, and it's Florida. Like, I think places like that are even more queer and cool because it's like they really, really, really had to fight to be there and had to be toes down in the sand. You know, we're here and we're not going anywhere on a whole nother level than city folks did.
No, real. And I've met so many people here in New York who say, you know, I'm from this place and like moved to New York because I felt safer, or, you know, I'm from an extremely red state and it hasn't felt safe, X, Y, and Z. But I haven't really given thought to the people who do choose to stay and find, and the way you said, like dig and find and build brick by brick their own communities, their own spaces, their own, because like you said, queerness is everywhere. We are in all of these states, no matter how red they are. And we all need that community. So we find a way to create it, which I don't even think Arkansas and like think about a small queer town, but like it's actually really beautiful and speaks to the resilience of queer people.
A lot of the towns too, it was like an artist community that originally kind of made it safe for queer folks. Like in Saugatuck, an art school was founded, and that's kind of like the start of, you know,
the overlap.
Arts and theater. And it's like the art community is very queer and open and accepting too. A lot of these places, it's like the 30s and 40s started attracting queer travel, which is wild that it took decades and decades and decades for gay marriage to be legalized. And, you know, that's way before Stonewall and all of these other things. So
you mentioned Arkansas, you mentioned Michigan. Do you have any other like favorite queer small towns or favorite gayberhoods, or like ones just off the top of your mind that you would recommend to people or suggest people visit if they're looking for places within the US, you know, that they're like, I don't want to have to go to Barcelona, Spain, for example, to experience, you know, queerness, and I want to find it here within the US. Where would you recommend people to go?
Yeah, well, I think right now, a lot of trans people are afraid to fly, and that's like so valid. And I just read a stat that 88% of trans travelers like are preferring road trip travel, so I think I'm always going to be pumping up the Midwest. I think one place that I went recently was Madison, Wisconsin. It's probably one of the most trans-friendly places that I've been to.
Ever?
Which is wild. In the state of Wisconsin.
Wow.
Yes. Madison, I want to say almost every single bathroom was all gender bathroom.
Wow.
It's just this like radically queer and trans hub of Wisconsin. Yeah. And they have they have the largest producer only farmers market. So they're all about like farm to table, supporting small businesses, supporting farmers. You can go to like a lesbian owned wine bar. You go to a gay owned, cheese store. Like it's there. Yeah. It's not the most diverse place, but it's definitely very queer and trans. I would say it's not small town, but I just went to Kansas City, Missouri, which is again, I was terrified going into, Missouri. It's like each time I get a little bit more confidence, like these places exist. And, Kansas City, another place that's like, it's a trans sanctuary city. They are fighting for queer and trans people, and I feel like emotional, but just some of the folks that I meet during my travels are like, just give me like so much hope, like queer and trans, like elders just using their last dollars to create third spaces and fight. This one place that I went to, was like a queer owned third space where they had gender affirming haircuts. They had gender affirming, a massage therapist. They have a tattoo artist in there. You can just hang out. There's a shop or there's like a store, and it's like, it's just when, there's so much like, I think anxiety, and I think a lot of queer and trans travelers can relate to this. You feel so anxious going into a destination, and then you like see all these like super inspiring people and like the local stories of, I don't know, it's really magical to be able to meet folks like that. And I think that's definitely like what keeps me going. And it's the stories that I want to come out into my content, because I realize, not everyone's going to get to Kansas City. So we have to keep telling these stories and showing that this is out there. And yeah, I think we need so many more queer and trans, creators out there.
100%.
And writers and artists and
creators in all forms, in all forms. But that, like, just, what happened just now where you got emotional talking about it, like, that's why this feels so vital, because you don't have it for so long, and then you experience it and you're like, oh my God, like, this is here and it's for me. And then when the rest of the world is kind of like yelling at you as to why you shouldn't exist or like don't belong here, and to have these spaces where, have yourself reflected back to you in such beautiful ways in these small towns where it's unexpected. I think it's the unexpectedness of it, of like, it makes it so much more beautiful. So that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. I would have probably never went to Missouri, but now I'm like,
Kansas City, they have the first professional women's soccer stadium in the world.
Wait.
Which tells you a lot about them uplifting women's sports.
Yeah.
They have like accessible, inclusive bathrooms. They have local, really, really good food. It's all local vendors. Like, it's just so well done. And I feel like that encapsulates the city too.
That's
and all the cool things that they're doing.
That's beautiful. You've touched on a few times, I think these places that you've traveled have been more recent in your more recent experience, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yeah, within the last 3-4 years. Okay.
And I know we also briefly touched on your transition, and I do want to speak to the difference, because there is privilege in being straight passing when you're queer. And I do want to talk specifically about the experience of like different members of the LGBT community and how your experience will differ, whether you're just a lesbian or a bisexual person, or it's going to look different for all of us. And so one thing that you specifically said is like, you gained unique insight into the different ways the world treats you, first as a woman and now as a queer trans person. And I would really love and appreciate if you could speak more to that and how that experience has changed for you personally.
Yeah, thanks for that question. First off, it's so true that we all have different privileges and we all have different experiences. That's why, again, it's so important that we're all sharing our stories and uplifting each other. Trans folks of color obviously have a way different experience. And I get those comments on my videos all the time, and it's so fair. And we need all of the stories. But going back to kind of my experience. So I first was traveling as a thin femme white person. You know, I thought everybody was nice. Everyone was so kind and giving, which, yes, the world is great in so many ways, and there are such giving people. But looking back at those pictures, I'm like, girl. So it's different now, presenting as Mask, which happened. I think it's been about a year since my transition into has kind of started. It's hard to say, like, people say, okay, I transitioned like this date. I'm like, this whole thing has been like a transition of like, exploring gender has not been such a clear cut. This is when this happened. But I will say, things changed a lot when, I started presenting as Mask. You kind of are invisible, which is pros and cons. I'm like, it is so nice to not get catcalled anymore. To not get unwarranted attention is such a privilege. It's such a change. And I think there is a bit of a loss when I guess you are invisible, but traveling as a solo female woman is really hard as far as like the attention and the harassment and fearing for your safety. So I think I feel a lot safer as a Mask person. I get more respect from men, which is odd. It's like a different experience. I definitely feel more visibly queer for the first time. So just holding, you know, a lot of times on road trips, I won't pee. Like, I won't go to the bathroom. I'll hold it. Me and my spouse recently went to Florida, and when we touched down, there wasn't an all gender bathroom that we could find in the airport. And I was like, well, you know, I gotta go, but I'm not going. Like, because of the bathroom laws. So that is a whole nother world that, you know, I never thought about bathrooms as much as I do now. And it's quite scary, especially on road trips. You're like, okay, you know, we kind of, thankfully, like, my husband is also trans, so we can kind of go back and forth. I'm like, okay, do we feel safe here? Like, and also I think I didn't realize, so again, about a year ago is when I cut my hair, is kind of like when let's say that I started my transition. And I went to Sweden, to Stockholm for Pride, and I got on a plane, and I realized, and at the time I was feeling very comfortable in like the non-binary space. And I just realized like how gendered language is, and how gender diverse folks are, again, just like invisible. Everything is like ladies and gentlemen, sir or ma'am. And I could feel myself twitch as this like baby trans person. Like, every time the flight attendant would say ladies and gentlemen, I'm just like, I just twitched. It was this uncomfortableness and this like invisibleness, and realizing that the world is like not kind of made for you. And, yeah, I think gender diverse folks, intersex folks, trans people are not really, considered. So that's really odd. Also, after changing my name and not having my correct name on my identification was, and having to give my ID when I'm traveling or going to a bar and having them say my old name or my dead name was just this, like, I felt like this imposter. And yeah, I remember, my sister-in-law lives in Tennessee, which is kind of, not the greatest place for, queer and trans people. And, at the time, my husband had an identification with an incorrect name on it, with a femme name. And, he very much so passes as a man. And so we got stopped by police for speeding. And we have like this, gay up the world air freshener. And I see the lights and I pull the air freshener and immediately I go into like survival mode and like my whole life like flashed in front of me because, you don't really have like, sometimes you don't have control in those situations. And I know folks of color, can definitely relate to that is, when you get stopped by the police, like it's scary. It's scary. So he ended up giving, his ID over and the cop was like, is this your name? Cause it's very much a femme name. And, the, state trooper let us go and you could tell he was very much so an ally. So I feel like those folks allies are hiding in plain sight and are there. So that was, while though it was like extremely scary, it was also, a learning experience too.
Yeah. And
just to know, what trans people have been going through for decades. And again, folks of color and immigrants and, I think so many communities can relate to some of these experiences.
Thank you so much for sharing that so vulnerably, because even as a queer person myself, like my experience is so different. Like I said, all of our experiences are so different. And some of the things you mentioned aren't even things that I would think about, as a queer person traveling. And it's like the set of things that I'm paying attention to are different than the set of things that a non-binary person or a trans person or an intersex person is thinking about. So thank you for highlighting those, because I don't think, if I wasn't aware, then most people are probably unaware of the things that you're considering when traveling, or the fears that come up, or just what that feels like for you. That was really great insight. And the part that truly stuck out to me is the difference in, obviously I know we live in like a patriarchal society, but the difference and contrast in treatment from being a woman to, being an openly queer trans person and functioning in the world and feeling safe and respected, like things that we should all feel as humans, is truly wild to see firsthand, that like contrast, on the other side, because not any of us get to actually experience that. But thank you for sharing that. And I think in that same vein, I noticed some of your travel guides and things have been more trans and non-binary specific. They're not, and I felt like that was intentional, not just labeling them as like LGBTQ travel guides, but making them specifically for trans and non-binary person. And I wanted to speak to that a little bit. And I'm curious how those differ from the other LGBTQ guides and what kind of made you want to create those guides specific for trans and non-binary people.
I think so much of my content is like, I'm searching for things and I'm like, this is not out there and I need to create this. And going back to kind of how the invisibility factor, of being a trans traveler, not having the representation, even though we very much so want to travel, we are very much so existing. There are 2.8 million trans people in the US and a lot of us want to travel. A lot of us, I think, are like me, where transitioning later in life, we have decades and decades of great travel experiences. And now our experiences and our travel needs have changed, and those resources are not available to us. And I think talking to my trans friends and realizing kind of the horror stories that they've experienced in bathrooms and the fears that they're experiencing, with passports and IDs and all of this, there's a lot of challenging things, and it's hard to find, information. And I think, so I'm like, at first I'm like, is this too niche? But it's not niche. It's not too niche. So yeah, Madison, Wisconsin was my first, trans and gender diverse travel guide. And I'm really excited to launch that series. I feel like I've gotten a lot of good feedback, and, talking to trans people, trans travelers again, and just going to an LGBTQ plus, travel conference, 2 weeks ago. Trans travel is very much so top of mind. And, I think when I first was coming out and going to things like that, I realized that people aren't saying the word trans, aren't saying, and it was the same back then when people didn't want to say gay, people don't want to say queer. People are just like afraid to even acknowledge. So I think this content it's healing for me. It's resources that I need, and I know my spouse needs and my friends need. And yeah, and I think it's been, I feel really inspired by like, accessibility creators. Again, all of this, like, I feel like it's kind of a subsection of inclusive travel. I just saw a video, acknowledging blind travelers, acknowledging wheelchair users and autistic travelers, and, and they all intersect sometimes, So I'm really excited to be creating this content. And I think it feels meant to be. I've had, 10 years of writing, and now I'm just kind of, writing about what needs to be out there. And I feel like a lot of, again, creators, artists can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely filling a need. And I love seeing it. So definitely filling a need. I think my last question is around, we spoke so much about queer community and it surviving in difficult, more conservative places, but still thriving in those places, and people fighting for it to exist, and places around the world that you've experienced it, and just me finding it here in New York. And I would love to know the ways, because you specifically mentioned Egypt, and we didn't really get into that here, but you mentioned like still finding the pockets and needing to do some digging. And I would love to know if you have any resources or what you use when you're searching, if you're in a place where it's not an obviously queer community and looking for ways to connect with other queer people and find them. What's worked for you before? What do you recommend? What have you used? Because I think those can be really helpful resources.
Definitely. I feel I really like the app Everywhere is Queer, which the founder just moved to New York City.
Oh my God.
So I love that, just finding queer spaces. It lists all of the queer and trans owned businesses in the world. And so that's a really great app. I love, honestly, Eventbrite for finding queer events. Yeah. Eventbrite always is on the queer and trans events. I went to a T4T event in Dublin, Ireland. That was on Eventbrite.
Okay, Eventbrite. Okay. Yeah. I've used Couch before. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think it's newer.
I've seen it. Yeah. I have not used it. I've seen it. I think that's cool it definitely makes travel more accessible and safer to stay with queer folks. I did use like the couch surfing app back in the day, but I think what I always look for is, queer owned businesses, try to find a queer bookstore, a queer bar. My spouse is sober, so a lot of times, just finding like the queer coffee shop. Again, historically, lesbian coffee shops have always existed. You're going to find queerness in bookstores, in coffee shops. You're going to find it. There's going to be some knickknack shop or queerness in museums too. We're all nerding out in there. And obviously in queer bars, I think that's kind of like the easiest way that I found a lot of queer community is just going to, I love like a queer towny bar.
Okay. That's helpful. I think it's important to have resources that are online and offline. Every Queer is cool because it gives you the map on, on an app online, but then you can go and like find the places in person or, the Eventbrite. But also sometimes just like doing a little extra digging when you're somewhere and a little extra Google. Like we said, you're filling a need right now with creating the resources. And there's definitely other, trans and queer creators who are doing it as well. Few and far between, but they exist. But that's why those resources are helpful, like doing the research and seeing what you can find in different places. So that's really helpful. I appreciate everything you've shared. This has been such a great conversation. I'm so grateful for your time and for you sharing so vulnerably. And I've loved the past hour of just getting to talk about queer travel. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm so grateful. And is there anything you'd like to share as like a closing or a final share with the listeners? The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing the work that you do as well, in giving a voice to folks in the community. I think it's really important. So thank you. But I think it's important some people are going to say, insert city, town, place is dangerous, or don't go to this place. And I think that's dangerous. And I think that you should go wherever you're called to. I think we all have different, boundaries, experiences, and I'll never tell someone to not go somewhere. And I think you should definitely follow your curiosity, and everyone deserves to travel, and travel is advocacy and activism. So I think the best form of advocacy and activism is just being yourself and being out and moving around.
Yes.
Traveling around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Amazing. Yes. Beautiful. Thank you. That was a beautiful reminder. We were talking a little about your content, your resources. So if people haven't seen it and they do want to tap into what you have to offer, which I recommend everyone do, what would be the Instagram, whatever, all the places where you exist, where people can come find all the queer joy?
My handle is Explore with Chase on all social media platforms. So I would love to feel free to DM me, connect. I love to chit chat, talk about gay and queer travel and trans travel. So
amazing. Thank you so much. And that was my interview with Chase, everyone. Thank you so much to Chase for sharing so openly and vulnerably about their experience as a queer and trans traveler. And as promised, my big takeaway from this interview is often we hear about why inclusion in travel spaces is important. We hear about why inclusion in a lot of spaces is important, but we don't necessarily hear why. And I know that can seem like a little bit of a no-brainer. Yes, it seems obvious that inclusion just is important as a default, but today's interview opened up my eyes so much to things that I didn't even know, and I am a queer traveler myself. There is so much about the trans travel experience that I wasn't aware of, or things that I wasn't aware of about the queer community and the places you can find it around the US. And it really showed me that even I, as a queer traveler myself, have so much to learn. It showed me that we can all open ourselves up to learning more, to make us more empathetic people, because I think that is what travel is meant to do. It's meant to make us more empathetic people. We're meant to see the experiences of people of all walks of life from all over the world, from so many different countries and languages and cultures and backgrounds, and see ourselves in that. no matter how different the experience, because we truly are all one and the same. So I'm so grateful for this interview with Chase today, because I got to see myself in their trans travel experience. And I hope you listening to this today were able to walk away from this feeling a little bit more informed, a little bit more empathetic, and a little bit more connected to the world and to other travelers. And the quote that I want to leave you with today is from Alden Jones, a queer travel writer, and it simply says, "Travel itself is inherently queer." Simple, yet honest, real. So thank you so much for listening today. I truly, truly, truly hope you enjoyed this interview with Chase, enjoyed me as a guest here now as part of the Zero to Travel Host Collective, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.